Hello and welcome to the Religion and Popular Culture podcast, the podcast where we discuss religion, popular culture, and everything in between and beyond. I'm Ala Thomas and I am joined by my wonderful colleague, Vivian Asimos. How are you, Vivian?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm well, thank you. I'm too hot. It is just too hot right now. We have passed the outrageously hot 2 days that we had a couple of weeks ago. But it is still too hot for my liking.
It is still summer, and that is already bad.
Yes, and I don't like it at all. But we're persevering, nonetheless, and continuing with the podcast because that's just how great we are. And despite the fact we're melting. And today we're going to talk about religion in the context of American Idiot, the 2004 record by Green Day. Now, Vivian, you and I have discussed this album in the past, but for the sake of a coherent podcast, what is your experience with American Idiot? Do you like it? Do you not like it?
So,
have you even listened to it?
I have listened to it. I had this album.
Of course you did.
Of course I did, because
it was a monster. Who didn't own
I
that
am
album?
me, and I existed back in the early 2000s. And as we have talked about both on and off pods, I was very into protest movements, particularly against the Iraq War. At the time, I mean, I'm still against war, but at the time, I was very against the Iraq War specifically, and
Yes.
And that kind of stuff. So albums and music that was particularly rallying against that was something that I gravitated towards. We had a lovely moment of in an album book club that we are a part of, that I had you listen to Flowbots, which was another protest album, which did not hold up quite as well as I was hoping it would.
I still thought it was a fun album.
Oh, it was very fun, and it was very fun to go back and relive the early 2000s teenage angst of war before we realized how much worse things could get.
How much worse society got from there. Yes, so for anyone who isn't familiar, American Idiot was the, I want to say, 7th Green Day record. It was released in 2004, which is scary to think of now. And it very much became a zeitgeist album. Because the timing of the record, what the record was about, everything just seemed to match up, and it became a monster hit. So if you've not heard it, it's described as a punk rock opera. It's a concept record that tells a story from start to finish, which I'll get into in a moment. And it is closely associated with the Iraq War and the presidency of George Bush, particularly the song American Idiot. When that single came out, everybody just instantly assumed that he was the American Idiot. That they were referring to. The concerts they did at the time almost became political rallies. Right-wing fans of Green Day, not that there were many of them, but the ones that did exist were feeling alienated at the gigs, weren't returning, and Billy Joe Armstrong from Green Day has recently said that, for example, if you're a Trump supporter, you're not welcome at a Green Day show. It's as simple as that. And fair enough.
Yep.
So it's a very interesting record because it's, at the time, Green Day's popularity was waning a little bit. They had obviously sold millions of records already by this point, but they went and decided to do something quite ambitious with this record, and it paid off, creatively and commercially. People tend to put American Idiot on the pedestal of being their political album. I don't necessarily think it is their political album. I would say that title goes to the follow-up record, 21st Century Breakdown, which came out in 2009. That is definitely a political album. I think American Idiot is actually more about people. And people, particularly young people, navigating their lives in post 9/11 America, with the ongoing Iraq War and economic issues and so forth. And the reason I say that is that the record tells the story of a character known as Jesus of Suburbia, And not all of the songs are necessarily about the American political system. They're about this character and him navigating his life in the wider context of politics and religion in early 21st century America. It's not the easiest storyline to follow, but it is there. The character essentially leaves home and tries to leave his life behind to the extent that he undergoes almost a personality transition, adopts a new persona. So halfway through the record, the Jesus of Suburbia becomes known as Saint Jimmy. And then towards the end of the record, Saint Jimmy is figuratively killed off and he goes back to his day job. In fact, I think he's just working in an office job at the end of the record where he becomes Jesus again. So we'll get into the fact that the character is called the Jesus of Suburbia and so on in a moment. But what I thought was very interesting about this storyline was soon after the album became a massive hit, it was turned into a Broadway musical. Have you seen the American Idiot Broadway musical?
I have not. I was going to ask if you had.
I have. I didn't see it on Broadway. I actually saw it in Cardiff when the production did a UK tour. And I really enjoyed it. The way the story's told is really interesting. So the band that plays the music is on the right-hand side of the stage throughout the gig. And they'll play the songs as they are on the record, but then there's a cast of Broadway singers dressed in very punk rockish outfits, dancing around the stage, singing the songs. And the way they present the story is just as vague as it is on the record.
I was going to ask, because I will be honest, when I was younger and listening to this album, when I had CD players and was listening to albums in that fashion because it was 2004, 2005, I don't think I was able to really follow. I don't think I fully understood that there was supposed to be a cohesive story. Because to be honest, we've had a conversation on our previous pod when we were talking about this, about how I think I mentioned that I don't think it's the best protest album, and it caused a little bit of an argument between us. But I think that part of the reason why I think that is because it's not very coherent. And because... Yeah, narratively. And also the fact that not even all of the songs are focused on it. Like, Wake Me Up When September Ends is about Billy Joe Armstrong's loss of his own dad, and is not part of the narrative of Jesus of Suburbia, or is a protest song in the way that, I wouldn't say American Idiot really fits the story either, but it's at least thematically fitting the story.
Interestingly, they did, not long after the record came out, when Wake Me Up in September Ends was a single, they kind of retroactively made it a political song with a video. Have you ever seen the video? Yeah,
wasn't it a reference to 9/11?
Well, the video was about a young guy joining the army and going out to fight in Iraq.
Oh, that's right.
But of course, the use of September so shortly after 9/11 conjured...
Yeah, because I had always assumed when I was a kid that it was a reference to 9/11. And I had very mixed feelings about that song, but that's not the point. But basically, I think that it's not the most coherent of narratives when it comes to these kinds of concept album type approaches. And I don't know whether Green Day's done it much better, because this was their first attempt at this. And, obviously your first attempt at things tend to not be your best attempt at them. So I don't know whether they've been more successful later on.
Well, I don't know if it's a failing or more if just that's what they were going for.
Yeah, I guess. It was just one of those things where... Listening, but the beginning is so tight. So, when I was first listening to it as a kid, I didn't quite pick up on the full narrative. Listening as an adult, I was, especially because I listened to it twice recently. One time, I listened to a podcast that does album reviews, and they recently did American Idiot. And so I listened to it with that pod, essentially. kind of re-listening to the album and remembering certain aspects of it. And then I listened to it again yesterday because you proposed doing this episode. So I re-listened to it. And as an adult, I was able to really grab hold of the beginning of the story. I thought it was really firm, particularly the song Jesus of Suburbia, which is, you know, their attempt at like a Bohemian Rhapsody-esque type song. I thought was really tight. I get the vibe. I know exactly what's happening. I know who this person is. I know what they're doing. And then at a certain point, it starts being like, I don't know, I guess, maybe. Are they arguing? Are they breaking up? Or did they already break up? I don't, you know, it was like, it starts to get fuzzy. So it's not like it was always fuzzy or even just always strong. It was kind of, it was like they had a really good opener idea and then went, and then I don't know, something else happens.
They definitely pick it up again with Homecoming, which is the other Bohemian Rhapsody-esque 9-minute song on the album, which is the killing off of St. Jimmy and the going back to his life as Jesus of Suburbia. But I think conceptually what they were playing with was the idea of somebody just being disenfranchised with their life, you know, quite disillusioned, wanting something more, going through a variety of issues in life, and then just returning to what their life was, realizing that nothing actually changed, especially after the breakup as well.
Yeah, I think...
With What's Her Name. And What's Her Name is the name of the character. That's not me forgetting. So in the stage production, her name is What's Her Name.
Yeah. They always refer to her as that because I think in a later song when he's supposed to be kind of reflecting on everything, he can't remember her name. And that's, you know, there's okay. I always have to try to keep myself from going on like really long feminist rants on this podcast, and I will try to not do it, but I feel like this era of this type of music, I think, was very echoing of a particular type of person. And I think at the time it was less dangerous. Now, hearing certain songs on the album, it particularly Boulevard of Broken Dreams, made me kind of go, ugh.
What was it about Boulevard of Broken Dreams?
It felt very much like an incel song. You know, that idea of
right, don't spoil this song for me.
But it's that thing of like the typical, it's what you were talking about, of the feeling of disenfranchisement, the feeling of being kind of not really knowing what you want out of life, but feeling like it's something more, but not really achieving it, I think is very, at least somewhat universal. I think that many people have felt that way. I have felt that way. I'm sure you have felt that way. That's not what I'm getting at. What I'm getting at is, though, the particular type of person that he's painting and the way that they are being disenfranchised, the way that they then refer to women, particularly forgetting names of people who are supposed to be really important in their life, but they're a woman. And then this kind of idea of, but I'm walking alone. And it feels, it's one of those things where in 2004, that attitude I would not have connected to a particular type of person. Because I think while they did exist, they weren't quite as vocal.
I think
while now those people are quite vocal and would probably very much connect to that song in a way that I don't know if Green Day would be okay with. I should stress that. I don't think Green Day is that type of person.
Yeah, they're a very progressive band.
Yes, and so that's why I want to make that very clear. Like, I am very aware that Green Day is very progressive, that Billy Joe himself, I think, is bi, yeah?
He is, yeah.
So they're not exactly the typical white, hetero, angry kind of mood, but I think their music appealed to that type of person, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think the last time I saw them live, they were selling T-shirts that said something along the lines of F homophobia.
Yeah,
Something like that.
And that's something that even in American Idiot, they directly talk about homophobia, and the whole song of American Idiot is that he's talking about people who call hymn names or refer to certain things or believe in certain aspects. And one of them is he refers to someone calling him the F word. And he uses the word directly. I am not going to, but he uses the word directly and refers to that kind of person. So in that, he's calling out those kinds of people. He's calling about homophobia and saying, well, you're the idiot for thinking this and using this word.
There's a line in Holiday as well where he says, kill all the Fs that don't agree. And of course, he is the person who doesn't agree.
Yeah.
There's a lot of perspectives and characters in American Idiot. They're not well-defined characters, but you can always tell, that, okay, this is this sort of persona, this is that sort of persona. I always felt that with What's Her Name, as in not remembering her name, when I first heard the record, I thought that was down to substance abuse. Because there's several instances of the record where the character is clearly deeply involved in substance abuse and has a very fragmented memory. I think that's part of it. Yeah, and I think that part of the problem is probably the fuzziness of it. So so for example, the Taylor Swift album, the one of the more recent ones, Folklore, is there's 3 different stories that she's telling throughout the album, and each one of the songs tells essentially the same story from a different character's perspective. We should cover that album. I can talk for ages about storytelling and folklore and the album Folklore and how it all works together, but that's a conversation for another time. But in that, when I'm listening to it, I know exactly what the story is. I know how it's progressing. I know each one of the characters, and she doesn't have to use their names. She doesn't have to kind of paint it a certain way, but I know exactly which story and who she is and what the perspective is. With how fuzzy the story is in American Idiot, I think that's where it kind of becomes less of a, oh, you're parodying this, or you're pretending to be this persona. To me, I felt like it was less clear, anyway. I think conceptually as well, like, because you can have a concept album, like, have you heard The Who's Tommy?
No, but I've heard songs from it, I know about it.
Yeah, I'm not the biggest fan of it, but anyway, that's a very clear concept album, where everything is being spelt out so incredibly, Tommy walks into a room and his mother says this, and, that's how the lyrics... Yeah. That's not an actual lyric.
I don't need it to be that detailed.
Yeah. I think American Idiot conceptually is more thematic than narrative, and I think that's what they then try to put across with the stage show. So the background of the stage production was like a run-down, desolate American city, lots of railings and scaffolding and stuff like that, which meant that there was a lot of like parkour-style dance routines. When that musical came out, by the way, just as a side note, they were accused of, selling out in that, Broadway music, that's not punk. I would just like to say, for the record, there is nothing less punk in the universe than people arguing about what real punk is. Because if you're going to go down that route, you're turning punk into something conservative. And so on, which is just... Who wants to make conservative music? But anyway... so when we... I remember when I saw the stage show, I heard somebody as we walked out saying, "Oh, yeah, that was great. I didn't have a clue what happened, though." So they were intentionally keeping that fuzziness, because I went into it thinking, oh, okay, so in between the songs, is there going to be dialogue that really fleshes out what's happening here? The answer is not really. It's more a case of a live performance of the song with a cast of people rather than Green Day playing it live. There's some really shocking moments in it. So they included some songs from the follow-up album to, make it longer as a stage show. Did you ever hear 21 Guns?
I did.
Yeah, so 21 Guns is in the American Idiot musical. And there is a moment halfway through the show where one of the characters that Jesus of Suburbia / Saint Jimmy has fallen out with, a friend that he no longer speaks to, has gone to fight in the war and has returned, and he's sat in a hospital bed. And there's a moment halfway through the song where, okay, spoilers if you're interested in seeing the stage show, the nurse pulls the sheet off his bed, and you see that he's had his leg amputated. And I'm not sure how they did it. Presumably his leg is underneath the bed, and but it was really effective because the audience gasped halfway through. So again, it was these thematic things of showing, what was happening at the time, the people who were sent out to fight the war for other people. Sorry, I phrased that really badly. Politicians choosing to send people to war in a...
Soldiers are not making the decision.
Yes, a chess player using pawns, for example. And that's always the sort of concept album that I've taken American Idiot to be, is that it does have a very loose story, but it's about the themes and the issues it's discussing, not necessarily the story. And some people will be on board with that. Some people would prefer that to an actual concept album, because some as an actual concept, some people would prefer that to a more rigid concept album, because a lot of people have an aversion to the musical format. I don't, so it doesn't bother me, but I know some people really groan when they hear that something's going to be a concept album. I think the songs on American Idiot, they work as standalone songs, which is one of the reasons why I think it became such a hit as well, is that it had really good singles that were very radio friendly. Whereas, I'm going to use the example of The Who again. Tommy, most of the songs in that album don't work on their own. It needs to be it needs to be heard as part of the full album. I've got a whole other rant about Tommy, about how it's an ableist record and so on. But it was recorded in 1969. As we discussed in the episode we did on the Star Trek original series episode, a lot of things were going on at that time that would not fly today.
I forgot to mention, this is just a very quick side thing, but I realized that it was in my notes in that Star Trek episode, and I never brought it up. But there is a very small snippet of a scene where Uhura is doing work, like some kind of rewiring, and is actually being an engineer on the Enterprise. And fucking Spock comes over and is like over her shoulder being like, oh, good to see you working, and you're working, kind of thing. And I was like, black women have to put up with this crap all the time of like, they're doing their job, they're just trying to get it done. She even goes at one point of like, this is taking a lot of concentration, I'd really appreciate it if you weren't over my shoulder right now. And it was like, and the white guy just having to stand there and making sure they're doing their job. And it was just one of those things where I'm like, oh. Anyway, it was not related to what we were talking about, but I just saw it in my notes and thought it was funny.
We are, of course, recording this episode just a couple of days after Nichelle Nichols' passing.
Oh, yeah.
Sadly. So, rest in peace, Nichelle Nichols, you icon. I love Uhura, and I love original series Star Trek. Yeah.
Sorry, side point.
No.
But should we talk about one of the big themes of it, which would be religion? The idea of Jesus of Suburbia, the whole reason why we're doing this podcast.
Yes, absolutely. Okay, 25 minutes in, we're about to do this. So when Billy Joe recorded this album, he wanted it to reflect American society, and he said that there are two pillars in American society, and one is politics and one is religion. So he wanted these to be the two pillars of the album. So what becomes immediately apparent to me when I listen to it is that he is inadvertently highlighting how these two pillars are almost one pillar.
Yes.
And merge with one another. But anyway, that's how he presented it, is that he wanted politics and religion to weave throughout the album. And I think he does that very successfully. His character of the Jesus of Suburbia is very interestingly named because it's a riff of Buddha of Suburbia, and secondly, what becomes very interesting for me is that on the one hand, yeah, okay, you've got the very obvious thing of he kills the Jesus of Suburbia persona to become Saint Jimmy in another life, and then he returns. So there's a resurrection of the Jesus of Suburbia. But also he uses a lot of metaphors surrounding Jesus's life to describe his own life. So his sofa, for example, is his crucifix. So he compares his life going nowhere. Was the lyric, get my television fix sitting on my crucifix. That he's essentially wasting his life sitting on the sofa watching TV. There's a really interesting lyric in the song where he says there's a line about the mums and brads being away, and that's meant to be a comment on stepfatherhood. So it's not a mum and dad, it's a mum and a brad. And for me, my favourite lyric on the whole record is, I read the graffitis in the bathroom stall like the holy scriptures of the shopping mall. And I love that lyric because for me, that actually sums up lived religion. That for this character, reading graffiti on walls informs him of worldviews and affects his thinking in a way that he considers to be religious, and in a way that is religious. That the parallel being made in the record is, well, reading this graffiti and the way that that the writing of the graffiti resonates with me is like religion, but actually it is religion. I think it's a stunning lyric. The song, it begins with the sitting on the sofa and so on, but by the end of the song he decides to leave home. Is that for you where then everything starts to go a bit fuzzy?
No, not quite, because the first song that I think is supposed to be the one that introduces what's her name, I think is also quite clear.
Mm-hmm.
Which is like the kind of rebel one.
She's a rebel.
Yeah.
And then it goes into Extraordinary Girl.
I think it probably loses me a little bit after that. I'd have to relook at the track listing because it was a very slow, like, okay, I think I know what's going on. But it was, I think each of the characters were kind of well defined and established. But then it was what happens to the characters that became really fuzzy. Which to me, there's nothing wrong with, but it might have been interesting instead to approach it with a portrayal of multiple characters, of these different people in this life dealing with these struggles. And then you can always end it with him coming back anyway, of like...
Yeah, that's what I found interesting about the stage show, is that is what they did. They had several characters.
To me, that would make sense, yeah.
Whereas you don't know if it's different characters. And, interpretation's a wonderful thing, right? So, I'm a firm believer that you take away from music what you bring to it. So music can resonate with you depending on your experiences and what you're taking from the song and so on. So you could interpret there to be different characters. I didn't, but the way that it was done in the stage show was pretty good because he does have a friendship in the show that there's a schism between the two. They go off and live different lives, particularly the one who goes to war. And the falling out between them is between the pacifist Jesus of Suburbia / Saint Jimmy and his friend who feels an obligation to defend America. And then they return at the end of the album, at the end of the show. That's what makes Homecoming such a good song in that show, is that's where the two characters reunite. And that's done really well. So yeah, yeah, you are right. It does definitely get fuzzy. And I think listening to it, I think that's intentional. Because I don't think they wanted the story to hold back the individual songs. But then I guess then it's just a case of different folks, whatever floats your boat and so on. Because what do you like with your favourite songs? Do you like songs that are very crystal clear in what these communicators trying to convey? Or do you like there to be a degree of ambiguity where you can take away from it what you want?
Okay. Well, I think that the difference in what you're saying is that you think that you can only read an interpretation with ambiguity.
Not necessarily. I'm more saying that that's what they were going for with that record.
I would say that you can be clear. Well, I think clear might be the wrong word. You can understand what something is trying to say, even if it's in your own interpretation of what that is trying to say. So, for example, we just did, a couple of weeks ago now, we did Orville Peck, which I think came out just, this will be coming out right after the Orville Peck episode. So it'll be 2 music episodes in a row. Sorry, guys. We're in the mood, apparently. Where, I think with Orville Peck, for example, we both listened to one of the songs, Curse of the Blackened Eye, and you had this idea of depression and running away from your life and that following you, and my view of it was about an abusive relationship and how that kind of haunts you and how that follows you around. And those are 2 slightly different. I mean, I would say that depression follows people that are in abusive relationships, but it was 2 different interpretations, but I wouldn't say that he wasn't very clear. But it's also not like, hey, this is a song about whatever, he never says that in the lyrics. Because it's not about that. It does allow the interpretation, and your interpretation is just as valid as mine. But it's still quite clear. You can still listen to it and get what he's trying to say within your own interpretation of it. So I think that's what your wording of the question is what I hold issue with, which is the most academic thing I will ever say on this podcast. That and having you define terms. But I think that there are a lot of different ways to approach it. I would say that I don't always necessarily only enjoy songs that are, I know exactly what it's about. There are a lot of songs, for example, songs that have no lyrics that, are not going to be incredibly detailing out what someone's mom said to somebody like the Tommy, you know what I mean? But lyrics can also be
very abstract.
Yes. And I don't necessarily hate that or like that. It kind of just depends on the song. Because then there are also songs that don't have lyrics that I feel are very leading. This has been my problem. I voiced it before. I will voice it again. It is my problem with John Williams. John Williams is essentially the Tommy of classic soundtrack music. It's very here's what you're supposed to be feeling. I'm going to tell you what you're supposed to be feeling, and I'm going to make sure that you feel that. And it doesn't leave the room for the interpretation, and it doesn't leave the room for this is the vibe that I get from this song, and therefore this is what I am reading into it. And other people that do soundtracks do leave room for that. Howard Shore being one of them, because Howard Shore is my god. But I think that it depends. It depends a lot, is what I'm trying to say. And I did a really long-winded way of saying it depends. But I think in this instance, I'm not to say that I don't like this album. I really do like this album. I liked it when it came out. I listened the crap out of it. I'm sure my mom would even be able to know a lot of the lyrics in this song from just having it be played a lot in my house growing up. So I do like this album. I just don't know if the concept of it was what was successful, but I think the album is successful, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, I do genuinely think that is what they were going for. They've never, so when they performed it live, for example, they never performed the album from start to finish. they always sprinkled the songs throughout the sets in different orders and things like that. There wasn't it wasn't like they put a production of it on. And then when they did with the stage show, while they tried to flesh certain aspects out, they still embraced some of the fuzziness of it. I thought it was something that I thought was quite interesting about the stage show. And I'm sorry, I wasn't planning on talking about it as much, but now that I'm thinking about it, it is really interesting. But something that I found interesting about the stage show is that, to me, it was trying to capture the vibe of a gig more than a theatrical performance. It was trying to capture the energy of a gig, and I get them wanted to do that. They're a punk rock band. They want to keep that DIY punk ethos even when they are doing a Broadway musical. So the band on stage, for example, there's just 4 people on stage. There isn't an orchestra down in the pit or anything like that. There's just 4 people on stage, keyboards, guitar, bass, drums. That's it. And a lot of the focus is on the band playing, and that's something I really like. I'm just rambling now about.
Well, so I think you mentioned how he kind of saw Billy Joe kind of saw the 2 pillars of American society as politics and religion, which the listeners will not have been able to see because this is audio only, but I gave a look to the Zoom camera when you said that. But it makes, there's a quote that I found when I was doing a very brief amount of research for this, where it was in an interview with him and MTV, I think. But he said, quote, "I felt like it crossed that line between church and state or politics and religion. I thought, how would I interpret the Bible, even though I've never really read it?"
Yes.
So there's no burning bush. There's burning towns and ethics, and I thought that was really fascinating to have. There's a lot in that quote, but there's obviously on the one hand what we've already kind of talked about of the separation of church and state and how he thinks he's being clever by merging them when it's that's reality. And then the other
there is
side
no separation of church and state.
Yeah, but the other side of it, of being how would I interpret the Bible even though I've never read it, which again, I wanted to kind of be that's what everyone's doing. What do you think people are doing?
Yeah, people don't read the Bible.
People haven't read the Bible?
I think what he's trying to say there, somewhat unsuccessfully, is how is he interpreting it as a non-Christian?
Yes, I knew what he was trying to say. I just thought it was a very funny quote because it is one of those things.
I think what he said about how there aren't burning bushes, but there are burning towers ties in with the holy scriptures of the shopping mall aspect. Understanding religion to be what he encounters in his everyday life. And what the interesting thing about American Idiot is that it's written about somebody in late teens, early 20s. It's written about a young person, but at this point Green Day were, I think, in their late 30s.
Yeah.
Oh no, they can't be. They must have been in their early I always forget how young Green Day were when Dookie broke out. Because they've had a long career, but they're still only in their early 50s. But they weren't the young folks that they write about on the American Idiot album. And that's interesting in itself, because that album is renowned for bringing them a new fan base of younger fans. Particularly because at the point when it came out, Dookie was 10 years old. The young fans that they'd accumulated in their early days was starting to be a little bit more my age. And then American Idiot came out, and then all of a sudden teens were into Green Day again.
Yeah.
So the ideas that he was discussing, the concept of the record and so on, was definitely striking a chord with younger people. And in that sense, I think they were, I don't want to use the word lucky, because they're writing an album about a very dark incident.
They're very talented people.
Yeah, and the record was in the right place at the right time.
Yeah.
And that contributed to its success as well. So what I really like about the use of religious imagery in this album is that it always comes down to lived religion. I know I'm the lived religion guy. I always bring things back to lived religion. But religion is used as a metaphor for understanding modern life. But what it's actually highlighting is that these aspects of so-called secular life, this other political pillar, if we're to think of it as two pillars, is one and the same. And I think that's something that the Holy Scriptures of the Shopping Mall lyric really captures quite beautifully, is that for this character, graffiti is scripture. And throughout the record then, the use of the name Jesus is really interesting because firstly, it does suggest an arrogance to the character.
So, okay, this goes to show
because
where...
it's a very arrogant character.
I was about to say,
presented
yes.
as...
But this also goes to show where in America I grew up, that Jesus, or Jesus, is a very normal name among the Hispanic population. So when I was initially listening to this as a kid, and I saw Jesus of Suburbia, and that there was supposed to be this character, I assumed that they were supposed to be Hispanic because his name was Jesus.
Ah, okay.
But, like, in retrospect, I get it, but there is a cultural difference there that for some cultures that would not be an arrogant move because that's just a name.
Yes, but it's always... I think it's made quite clear in the records that it's a name he has given himself.
Yes, I was about to say, as an adult, I caught on to that, but it just goes to show how, like, as a kid growing up in Florida surrounded by Hispanics, I was just like, yeah, Jesus is a name.
So he leaves home and he essentially becomes a different person. The Saint Jimmy. And again, keeping that imagery of being a saint. But what the character of Saint Jimmy does would often be seen as quite unbecoming of a saint.
Well, I think, was it in, I'm looking up the lyrics now. I think it was in She's a Rebel where, the character of what's her name essentially points out how he thinks he's something, but he's not actually doing anything. I'm looking it up. Sorry.
Which lyric is this? No. Go ahead.
I might be absolutely wrong as I read through these lyrics.
No, because there's a lyric from Letterbomb that I'm currently looking at because I want to quote it.
Oh, that's right. So one of the things that I also didn't realize until I was listening to that podcast was that some of the songs are paired. So, for example, Give Me Novocaine / She's a Rebel.
Yeah, so on Spotify they've made them one track, even though on the CD they weren't.
Yeah, I was about to say, because when I was listening to the podcast, they were talking about them as if they were always one track, and I could have sworn they weren't when I was listening to it as a youngin'.
Obviously it's made to be listened to. There's, like, you know, Holiday goes into Boulevard of Broken Dreams and stuff, but if you were skipping on a CD, they were separate tracks. I don't know why they've done that on streaming, if it's a way of getting people to listen to the album as a cohesive piece rather than throwing them into a playlist. But yeah, there's a lyric in Letterbomb that says, and this, from my interpretation, is the partner, what's her name, speaking to him, "You're not the Jesus of Suburbia. The Saint Jimmy is a figment of your father's rage and your mother's love."
Yeah.
And when they, again, I'm bringing up the stage show, I don't mean to. It's made very clear from the start that the Jesus of Suburbia is actually not a really nice guy. And he goes on a journey where what's her name leaves him, for example, because he's a nice guy. And even when the story finishes, he's still rough around the edges. You know, like what you were saying about how he doesn't even remember her name.
Yeah.
And stuff like that. He's still not perfect, but he comes to terms with the fact that he's not perfect. Oh, it's really well done. It's really nice, well done, I have to say. And then what's quite nice, again, spoilers for people who want to see the stage show, is that when the curtain goes down at the end of What's Her Name and comes back up, the entire cast all have acoustic guitars and they sing Good Riddance. Just at the end, just because it's nice.
Sorry.
It was a nice touch. But yeah, the entire cast have acoustic guitars. It's a lot of acoustic guitars.
Do they do the thing of messing up the beginning?
No, they don't. They don't do that. It's quite pristine. That was one thing that kind of put me off seeing the show at first, is that I heard some of the soundtrack and they sound like Broadway singers.
Well, yeah.
In that it sounded a little too polished for what I liked for those songs, but then when I saw it on stage, I didn't mind so much. The interesting thing about the stage show is that Saint Jimmy is played by a different actor. So there are two actors on stage. Kind of reminds me of Fight Club at this point. Have you seen Fight Club?
No, but I know what you are referring to.
Now, you know what I'm referring to. Now, Fight Club is incredibly incelly.
Yes.
Incredibly incelly.
I don't know if anyone would argue against that.
But what I mean about similar to Fight Club is that there's two people essentially playing one character. Am I giving away the twist to Fight Club for you?
I think at this point, that's okay.
Yeah. So you
like,
find
I
out...
know it, and I haven't even seen it.
Yeah, so you find out that Brad Pitt was Edward Norton all along. And when they did that on Broadway, for a brief while, Billy Joe played St. Jimmy. I think he did it for a few months. And then when Green Day went on tour after that, it's the best he's ever sounded live. And he's been amazing ever since as well. But on that particular tour, he sounded fantastic because he'd clearly had that Broadway training.
Yeah.
So maybe I had to eat my own words. But yeah, so the idea of Saint Jimmy is that, again, he's got this character where he's entering a rebellious part of his life. He gets involved with substance abuse, for example, his relationship with what's her name, and then there's a period in the album where the relationship breaks down, like it does in Letterbomb. After Letterbomb, you get Wake Me Up When September Ends, which, like you said, is the song that doesn't fit the album.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know where else they would have put it, to be fair.
Musically, it does, but narrative-wise, it doesn't.
Yeah.
There's a big conversation in the My Chem fan community about where Teenagers fits in the context of the Black Parade. Teenagers seems like the song that exists outside of the context of that album. And Wake Me Up When September Ends is that song here, because if you take Wake Me Up When September Ends out of the record, you've got What's Her Name walking out on him at the end of Letterbomb, and then it goes into Homecoming, which is him returning to his old life, realising that he's messed up everything as St. Jimmy, getting the office job and so on. I think the lyric is, Jimmy died today, he blew his brains out over the bay. And then there's a line about Jesus filling out some paperwork in an office job and stuff like that. So you can see the narrative, but Wake Me Up When September Ends does kind of stop that narrative. With it being a ballad, though, I think it's pretty well placed, because you've had a few rockers. You need to bring things down a moment, you know? You need to get real, guys.
I think, like I was saying, like, it's a good album, and I think the structure of it's quite good, and to be honest, most of the songs are bangers. I wouldn't say that there's like any skips for me.
Oh, it's an all-killer album.
It's a great album, but
it is an all-killer. They were firing on all cylinders at the time. And what I find really interesting about American Idiot is that they were about to release an album called Cigarettes and Valentines, and the master tapes got stolen. The studio got broken into and the master tapes were stolen. And they haven't surfaced since. I don't know if this is them trying to weave some sort of mythology surrounding it. I don't. I know you're going to roll your eyes. Just roll with it.
I'm not rolling them. I think that is a legitimate...
If this is them trying to add some mystique to the album, because the story is that the record was stolen. They were about to re-record it, and Rob Cavallo, who was Green Day's long-term producer, who also produced the Black Parade, funnily enough, said to them, okay, well, before you try, recreating something, do you think Cigarettes and Valentines was the best record you could make? And the answer was no. And he said, why don't you go away and actually try and make the best record you've ever made? And then they went and made American Idiot. It almost sounds like a bit of a too good a story to be true.
Unless the producer just really hated that album and was like, oh yeah, man, someone stole the tapes. I don't know what to tell you.
Oh. Don't look in the bin. It's definitely
Maybe
not
you just
there.
need to make an actually good album this time. I don't know.
I don't know if it's a case of they recorded a record that they were just not satisfied with, and then went back to the drawing board and then did American Idiot, and then there was this elaborate story. I find it quite difficult to believe that these tapes and these recordings still haven't circulated somewhere on the internet, because it implies that someone somewhere has an entire Green Day album just sitting in their house.
Maybe it was really bad, so they don't want to.
They actually did perform the song Cigarettes and Valentines on a tour a couple of years later, and it's a fine song. It's nowhere near American Idiot standards, but it's not a bad song. So yeah, there's definitely that element of mystique about it, that, okay, we're going to go and make the best record we've ever made. And I think they did. For me, American Idiot is the peak Green Day record. The follow-up record, 21st Century Breakdown, is really underrated in my opinion. I think it's almost as good. They were clearly going through a creative burst at the time, that they were just writing fantastic songs that were, that felt very fresh, and I still think do feel fresh. There's aspects of American Idiot where you think, you know what you were saying at the beginning of this podcast? Oh, things got so much worse.
Yeah.
Some of the songs still have a resonance in a very sad way.
Yeah, it's kind of there's a lot of the protest music from that time that when you go back and listen to them now, you just kind of go, oh, you naive little child. You have no idea what's coming. You have no idea where the world is going.
And I kind of wish Green Day would return to that. During Trump's presidency, Billy Joe was asked about whether he would do another big political record in the era of Trump. And he said, that man will never get a song out of me. Because he just didn't want to give him the satisfaction. But just write it, man. The world needs another American Idiot. I'm a really big Green Day fan. I think their last record was absolutely appalling. And if you're listening, Green Day, I'm sorry, but sort it out.
Come on the pod and we'll talk about lived religion as scriptures of the
that would
shopping mall. Yeah, because I'm sure that Green Day listens to our podcast, and it's not just my mom.
No. Of course they do. They want to know how their melding of religion and politics went over with us. Of course, our answer to that is that there was no need to meld. They were already.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I appreciate, though, the pointing out, because I don't think that they are the only people to be surprised when they see that the breakdown happens. Some recent news coming from America within the last couple of months of the throwing away of Roe vs. Wade, for example, is I saw so many people being surprised at religion playing a part in a political decision like that. And it's like, yeah, where do you think you have been living and what has been happening in this country forever? Yeah. This has been going on. And it is, I think it is worth, particularly in a protest album about America, of pointing out these things. And the overtly Christian language, which I would normally complain about, I think makes sense quite a lot here.
Yes.
Which is why I have not complained about it.
I think there's also a critique of Christianity in Green Day's music as well. There's a song on the follow-up album called East Jesus Noah, which is an explicitly anti-Christian song. Specifically criticizing the church as a money-making organization. Which, of course, we know means then that it's not a real religion. That's a very facetious comment on my part related to the religions I research. But yeah, because what's the other lyric that was just on the tip of my tongue? I'm going to look at the lyrics to Jesus of Suburbia again, which I do know off by heart. It's just there's a lot of them.
There's a lot. It's a long song.
It's a long song, and it doesn't get boring at all. That's the brilliance of it.
I had them pulled up, but I think I got rid of it for She's a Rebel. Yeah, so I mean at the very beginning, it's I'm the son of rage and love, the Jesus of Suburbia, the Bible of none of the above. So it really just, I mean, the very first lines of it are BT dubs. We're talking about this.
Yeah, it is. I think Billy Joe has rage and love tattooed on his hands since the writing of this song. Maybe? He has a lot of tattoos.
Yeah, I was about to say. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised, but...
He's a very, very tattooed man.
I mean, I don't know how I feel about that choice in tattoo, but all the more power to you. Even though there was a previous episode where I complained about Luca from Love Island's tattoos. But
I think the thing with Rage and Love is that it's rage against the machine, if you pardon the pun, and an anti-war sentiment with love.
Mm-hmm.
That's the way he positions.
As somebody who primarily does work on the conversation around fiction, make-believe, and the flexibility of the word believe in general, I had a particular love of the lyrics that is repeated quite a lot in a land of make-believe that don't believe in me.
You've beaten me to the punch. That's literally the line I was just looking for that I was about to say. But yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great line. There's a lot to unpack there as well.
Yeah.
Because there's, firstly, it's drawing from the secularization thesis that the increasing lack of faith in Christianity. So much of the secularization thesis, I know I keep going on about it, but so much of the secularization thesis is actually about Christianity, not necessarily about other religions, and particularly institutional Christianity. So a lot of secularization discussions concern European Christianity, also British Christianity and the Church of England. So much discussion of secularization comes down to church of attendance numbers. And so it's church attendance numbers on the one hand, and it's the rise of so-called rational thought on the other, cause and effect mentality of the scientific method. And that for me is what that lyric is tapping into, the land of make-believe that don't believe in me. What do you think he means by the land of make-believe?
I think it's another criticism of America in particular. And the idea of the kind of creation of American ideology and how it is based off of not only Christianity, but also these retellings, for the most polite version of the word that I could use, of history that paints a particular ideology. I just finished writing my next video essay script where I get into the mythology of the cowboy. And that is another American myth, and I'm using that word correctly, but an American myth that is trying to paint an idea of what it means to be American, what it means to be, what it means to be an American, and what that definition is, and which is a silly thing to have anyway. Before we got on this, we were talking about nationalism, and I think...
It makes me think of the so-called American dream.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot.
Well. You know, the land of the free, which we were
about to say. There's a lot that we can rip apart here.
And and freedom and the make-believe element of that.
But yes, there's. He is clearly referring to a lot of the American mythology that underpins the nationalist idea of what it is to be an American. And during this time, and it bears repeat, especially for people who are listening to this that aren't in the United States or from the United States, during this time in particular, the idea of what it was to be a true American was being thrown around a lot, particularly for people who were protesting the Iraq War, So if you were against war, you were being considered un-American. So there is a lot in this album that is directly having a conversation with that mentality. And American Idiot in particular is clearly him saying, well, then I don't want to be. Like, if that's what it is, then I don't want to be it. And I think that line in particular is once again playing into this thing of the idea of what it is to be American is made up.
Yeah.
But
yeah,
you are not believing in my understanding of being an American.
When, sorry, going off on a tangent here. When I first saw Green Day live, Billy Joe baptized 2 kids on stage.
We're an hour in, and you're bringing this up now. We've talked about so many aspects of the stage show and other things, and you bring this up now.
This wasn't directly related to American Idiot. This is actually about the song East Jesus Nowhere that I mentioned earlier. So I first saw them on that tour for the follow-up record. And during this song, I'll have to see if somebody filmed a video of it. During this song, he told the audience that he needed a child. And
that could go wrong.
And he said that he was going to baptize someone on stage right now, and sat in the lower part of, so it was in the O2 Arena, so in the lower part of the seating on the side, he could see a family with 2 kids, and he said, send them on stage. So he brought them both on stage, and he put his hands on both these 2 young boys' heads, and I couldn't see because I was stood down the front, so I couldn't see what the floor looked like. But I hope there was some sort of mattress there for what happened. So I didn't see this coming. But as he baptized them, he then sung the bridge that was leading up to the final chorus. And in true punk rock fashion, this bridge had no drums, and then the drums would kick in for the final chorus. And as the drums kicked in for the final chorus, he pushed both kids down. And they both fell on their backs, hopefully onto a mattress.
I would assume so.
Could you imagine? So, yeah, that only just came back to me. That was really great.
I cannot imagine that you brought this up this late.
I'd completely forgotten about it until just now, until the thought of him baptizing those 2 children.
So, like, the push thing is very Pentecostal, isn't it? I mean, I'm not a Christian specialist, so this is me talking out of my butt at this point. But like, the kind of like you have the hand on the head and then you kind of do like a push the Jesus out of you type of.
It also made me think of Submergence.
Yeah, there's now I feel like we could do a whole episode on just that moment.
Yeah.
I'll see if I can find a screenshot of it to put as the album art or the episode art for this one.
There is a video of it.
Okay, I'll get a screenshot from it to put it on the top of this.
Hopefully.
So if you're watching this on one of the players that actually show the episode art, I don't know which ones do this, but if you are and you're seeing something different, it's because I was too lazy to go and grab this. But hopefully I will not be too lazy and I will actually go grab that. You should shoot that over to me. Yes,
definitely. I just want, because they did a few nights at the venue, so I'm going to see if it was the one I was at.
You remember what year was this?
This was 2009.
And you remember things from 2009?
Yeah, I've got a pretty good memory for pointless trivia.
I am a sober person, dear listeners. I do not drink. I barely take paracetamol. So the fact that I do not remember anything in my life from before like 2 minutes ago is just a travesty. And I don't understand it.
Oh, I think I found it, ladies and gentlemen. People can now listen to us just YouTubing things.
Yeah, this is us between recordings. Is it the people?
Yes, this is it. Okay. Oh wow, yeah, I remember this.
Does it show the mattress at all?
No.
Oh.
Okay, I'm gonna watch it properly later, and then we could discuss it in a future episode.
Okay.
Yes. So Vivian, if people want to come and talk to you about Green Day and religious imagery and music and concept records and all the rest of it, where can they go?
They can go to Twitter and Instagram. I am at Vivian Asimos on both platforms. You can also check out my blog and website and YouTube channel, incidentalmythology.com. I can't believe I started on that one. I've also been putting up research vlogs, so if you want to follow research as it happens for my cosplay research, which is very quickly coming to the point where I need to actually be writing the book, then you can go and check that out as well. I'm putting up the research vlogs on YouTube under my channel, Vivian Asimos. Pretty easy. How about you, Alan?
And if people want to find me, they can simply come over to my Twitter page at AlanJLL Thomas.
This might be the episode to ask. Do you still have the blog available for...
I do still
readings?
have the blog. I haven't posted it in a very long time, but I actually have a website called holyscripturesoftheshoppingmall.com. Please don't sue me, Green Day.
It's fair use, right?
It's fairly used. I do need to update it. I do have a few things that I need to write about it on it actually. So yeah, I'll get back onto that. Everybody go visit it.
There's at least that. If you want to go read some old Alid thoughts, you can.
Yes, it is there, and I will add something to it soon, he says with an air of optimism. Well, thanks very much for listening, folks, and we will see you again soon.
Bye!